Today we start out with Ted Bundy. He murdered at least 30 young women across several states from Washington to Florida. He was executed on January 24, 1989 at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida, via the electric chair. He declined to get a special meal and was instead given the regular steak, eggs, hash browns, and toast, which sounds pretty good to me. His last words were, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." John Wayne Gacy. His crime was murdering 33 young men and boys. He was executed on May 10, 1994 at the Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. He was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was fried shrimp, a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, French fries, and strawberries. That sounds pretty good to me. His last words were, "Kiss my ass." On to Donald Dillbeck. His crime was that he murdered during a carjacking. Specifically, he murdered Lee County Sheriff Deputy Dwight Lynn Hall and Fay Lam Van. He was executed on February 23, 2023 at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida, by lethal injection. His last meal was pretty good. Fried shrimp, mushrooms, onion rings, butter pecan ice cream, and chocolate. His last words, "I really messed up." Aileen Wournos murdered 7 men in Florida. She was executed on October 9th, 2002 at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida. She was executed by lethal injection, and her last meal, she declined a special meal, but instead had a hamburger and other regular prison food. Her last words were, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock. I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus on June 6th. Like the movie Big Mothership and all, I'll be back." Gary Gillmore. He committed 2 counts of murder in Utah. He was executed on January 17th in 1977 at the Utah State Prison in Draper, Utah. He was executed by firing squad, and he had a hamburger, hard-boiled eggs, baked potato, coffee, and 3 shots of Jack Daniel's whiskey. His last words were, "Let's do it." Thomas Grasso. He murdered 2 elderly people in New York and Oklahoma. He was executed on March 20th, 1995 at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. He was executed by lethal injection, and his last meal were 2 dozen mussels, 2 dozen clams, a double cheeseburger, 6 ribs, 2 milkshakes, half a pumpkin pie, and SpaghettiOs. Wow, that's over the top. Anyway, his last words were, "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." Well, there you go. Albert Fish. He murdered 3 children and confessed to many more. He was executed on January 16th, 1936 at the Sing Sing prison in Ossining, New York. He was executed via the electric chair, and he had steak, chicken, ham, pork chops, potatoes, squash, and red wine for his last meal. Man, I'm telling you, these guys made out all right. His last words were, "I don't even know why I'm here." Velma Barfield. She murdered 4 people via arsenic poisoning. She was executed on November 2nd, 1984 at the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was executed by a lethal injection, and her last meal were cheese doodles and a 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola. Her last words, "I want to say that I'm sorry to everybody for what I've done. I want to thank everybody who's been supporting me all these 6 years." David Alan Gore. He committed 6 counts of murder involving young women. He was executed on April 12th in 2012 at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida, by lethal injection. His last meal was fried chicken, French fries, and soda. His last words, "I'm sorry for the death of your daughter. I am not the man I was back then." Charles Peace. He was convicted of murder and robbery. After killing a policeman in Manchester, he fled to his native Sheffield, where he became obsessed with his neighbor's wife, eventually fatally shooting her husband. He was executed on February 25th, 1879, at the Armley Goal, Leeds, England facility. He was executed by hanging. His last meal was English breakfast of eggs, bacon, sausage, and toast, and his last words were, "God help me." John Spenkelink. He murdered a fellow drifter in Florida. He was executed on May 25th, 1979, at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida, via the electric chair. He declined a special meal, and we have no record of any meal that he ate. His last words were, "Capital punishment means those without the capital get the punishment." And that might be actually pretty accurate. Ronnie Lee Gardner. His murder occurred during an escape attempt from a courthouse. He was executed on June 18th in 2010 at the Utah State Prison in Draper, Utah, via the firing squad. His last meal was steak, lobster tail, apple pie, vanilla ice cream, and 7-Up. He also watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now that's probably the best one that I've heard so far. The guy was living the dream. His last words, or I do not have any last words, no. Robert Alton Harris. He was convicted of a double murder, including two teenage boys. He was executed on April 21st, 1992, at the San Quentin State Prison in California, via the gas chamber. His last meal was a 21-piece bucket of KFC chicken, 2 large Domino's pizzas, a 6-pack of Pepsi, and jelly beans. His last words, "You can be king or street sweeper, but everybody dances with the Grim Reaper." Teresa Lewis. Her crime was a conspiracy to murder her husband and a stepson for insurance. She was executed on September 23rd in 2010 at the Greensville Correction Center in Jarrett, Virginia. She was executed by the lethal injection, and her last meal was fried chicken, cheese with butter, Dr. Pepper, and apple pie. Her last words, "I just want Kathy to know that I love her, and I'm very sorry." Lawrence Russell Brewer. His crime was a hate crime and the murder of James Byrd Jr. He was executed on September 21st, 2011, at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. Lethal injection was the execution type, and his last meal was chicken fried steaks, triple bacon cheeseburger, cheese omelet, fried okra, 3 fajitas, pizza, ice cream, and a pound of barbecue. Man, if the lethal injection didn't kill him, the last meal would have. Sounded pretty good, though. He, however, did decline making a final statement. He was probably still chewing his food. Our first perpetrator on this list is James Edward Smith. His crime was that he committed a murder during a robbery. He was executed on June 26th of 1990 at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. It was by lethal injection, and his last meal was he requested dirt but was given yogurt instead. His last words, "I'd like to give my love to my family and friends." Gee, that sounds like Ted Bundy. Next up is Ricky Ray Rector. He murdered 2 police officers, Arthur Criswell and Robert Martin. He was executed on January 24th, 1992, at the Arkansas Department of Corrections Cummings Unit by lethal injection. His last meal was steak, fried chicken, cherry Kool-Aid, and pecan pie. His last words, "I am ready." Next on our list is Peter Katan from Germany. He committed a series of assaults and murders, including Marie Hahn, Elizabeth Dory, and Christine Klein. He was executed on July 2nd, 1931, at the Cologne prison in Germany by a guillotine. His last meal was Wiener Schnitzel, fried potatoes, and white wine. His last words, "Tell me, after my head's been chopped off, will I still be able to hear my own blood gushing?" Clarence Ray Allen. His crime was that he ordered killings from prison. Now that's pretty interesting. He was executed on January 17, 2006 at the San Quentin prison in California by lethal injection. His last meal was a buffalo steak, fried bread, KFC, sugar-free pecan pie, and Diet Coke. He must have been a diabetic. Don't know, but there it is. His last words, "It's a good day to die. Thank you very much. I love you all." Earl Nelson. He committed a series of crimes across several states. He was executed on January 13, 1928. He was located at the Bond Street Jail in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. He was executed by hanging. His last meal were pork chops, eggs, potatoes, toast, coffee, and apple pie. Man, I'm telling you, these guys eat like kings. His last words, "I forgive those who have wronged me." Next on our list of wonderful human beings is Marion Albert Pruitt. He was convicted of multiple murders, including his wife. He was executed on April 12, 1999, at the Arkansas Department of Corrections Cummings Unit by lethal injection. His last meal was stuffed crust pizza, 4 Whoppers, French fries, 3 Pepsis, fried eggplant, squash, okra, and pecan pie. I don't even know where to begin thinking about that. His last words, "I want to tell everybody that I'm sorry. Thank you for forgiving me." Next up is Michael Bruce Ross. He was convicted of the serial murders of 8 women. He was executed on May 13, 2005. He was held at the Osborne Correctional Institution in Somers, Connecticut. He was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was a turkey a la king, rice, vegetables, white bread, and fruit punch. I don't know what turkey a la king is, but okay. His last words, "I take full responsibility for what I did." Next on the list is Juan Raul Garza. He was convicted of drug trafficking and committing many murders. He was executed on June 19, 2001, in a location of the U.S. Penitentiary at Terre Haute, Indiana. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last meal was steak, fried shrimp, French fries, onion rings, and strawberry ice cream. His last words, "I am truly sorry for my actions. I regret what I did." Up next is Robert Dale Conklin. He was convicted of murdering a man that he was dating. He was executed on July 12, 2005 at the Georgia Diagnostics and Classification State Prison in Jackson, Georgia. He was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was filet mignon, wow, there you go, shrimp, asparagus with hollandaise, French bread, goat cheese, cantaloupe, and ice cream. Wow, just convict me and hit me again. That's not bad. For his last words, he declined to make a final statement. We move on to Richard Bernard Moore. His crime was that in September of 1999, he entered a convenience store, and during a confrontation, the victim drew a gun, leading to a struggle between both men, and it resulted in the victim's death. He was incarcerated at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. He was executed on November 1st, 2024. His execution type was lethal injection. He had the option to choose between lethal injection, electrocution, or firing squad, and he chose lethal injection. His last meal was a steak cooked medium, fried catfish and shrimp, scalloped potatoes, green peas, broccoli with cheese, sweet potato pie, German chocolate cake, and grape juice. Wow, you don't want to go to death row to get a good meal, but he got one while he was there. Anyway, his last words were, "To the family of Mr. James Mahoney, who is his victim, I am deeply sorry for the pain and sorrow I caused you all. To my children and granddaughters, I love you, and I am so proud of you." Next up is Odell Barnes, Jr. He was convicted of committing a murder during a robbery. He was executed on March 1st, 2000 at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was justice, equality, and world peace. His last words, "I've felt your love and your presence ever since I've been here." Moving right along, our next one is Alton Coleman. His crime was that he committed 6 murders during a violent crime spree. He was executed on April 26, 2002. He's located at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, Ohio. He was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was filet mignon, fried shrimp, French fries, Brussels sprouts, salad, and to top it all off, he had some cheesecake. There you go. His last words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Next up is Billy Ray Irick. He was convicted of rape and murder of a child. He was executed on August 9th, 2018. He was located at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, Tennessee. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last meal was pizza with onions, pepperoni and sausage, and Mountain Dew. His last words, "I just want to say I'm really sorry." Next up is Carl Panzram. He was convicted of committing serial killings and other violent crimes. He was executed on September 5, 1930, at the Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas. He was executed by hanging. His last meal, he declined a last meal, and his last words were, "Hurry it up, you hoser bastard. I could kill 10 men while you're fooling around." Next up is George Appel. His crime was that he murdered a police officer. He was executed on August 9th, 1928, at the Sing Sing prison in Osing, New York. He was executed in the electric chair. His last meal, we have no record of a last meal for him. However, his last words were, "Well, gentlemen, you're about to see a baked apple." Gary Green. His crime was he murdered Lavetta Armstead and her 6-year-old daughter Jasmine on September 21st, 2009 in their home in Dallas, Texas. He was executed on March 7th, 2023 at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last meal was a traditional Southern menu consisting of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread. He also had a slice of apple pie and a glass of iced tea. His last words, "I apologize for all the harm I have caused you and your loved ones. I love you all, and thank you." Carla Faye Tucker. She was convicted of killing 2 people with a pickaxe during a burglary. She was executed on February 3rd, 1998, at the Huntsville unit of Huntsville, Texas. Carla Faye Tucker was executed by lethal injection. Last meal was a banana, peach, garden salad with ranch dressing. Last words, "I'm going to be face to face with Jesus now. I love you all very much." John Allen Muhammad, otherwise known as the DC Sniper. His crime was committing serial sniper attacks on Washington, D.C. area, killing 10 people. He was executed on November 10th, 2009, at the Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He was executed by the lethal injection. His last meal, chicken with red sauce and several cakes, including lemon cake, apple cake, and chocolate cake. He declined to make a final statement. Thomas Barefoot was convicted of murdering Bell County police officer Carl Levine in August of 1978 in Bell County, Texas. He killed Officer Levin during a traffic stop. He was executed on October 30th, 1984 in Huntsville, Texas, via lethal injection. His last meal was he declined a special request, so he just received the standard prison meal on that day, which was typically meat, potatoes, vegetables, and bread. His final statement, "I hope that I have one day we can look back on all this and say that we did away with the death penalty and we didn't have to take a life for a life. I want everyone to know that I had no bitterness and my love for you will forever shine through. I can taste it in my mouth. I'm ready to go. this is all. And on to Donald Henry Gaskins, otherwise known as Pee Wee Gaskins. His crime was committing multiple murders. He was also known as the meanest man in America. He was executed on September 6, 1991, at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. He was executed via the electric chair. His last meal was fried chicken, French fries, and a Dr. Pepper. His final words, "I'll let my lawyers talk for me. I'm ready to go." Alan Lee Davis. His crime was a triple murder of a pregnant woman and her child. He was executed on July 8, 1999, at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida. He was executed by the electric chair. His last meal, lobster tail, fried potatoes, shrimp, clams, garlic bread, and root beer. His last words, quote, "I don't want to be electrocuted. I'd like to be gassed." Now, I think that'd be worse myself, but anyway. Next up is Jeffrey Dahmer. He murdered 17 young men and boys involving necrophilia and cannibalism. He died on November 28, 1994, and he was actually not executed, but he was killed by an inmate. He was located at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. His last words, "I don't care if I live or die. Go ahead and kill me." And we don't have a record of his last meal either, as far as that goes. Sacco Vanzetti. Crime was murder and robbery. They were executed on August 23, 1927. The location was the Charleston State Prison in Massachusetts, via the electric chair. The last meal was soup, meat, toast, and tea. That sounds about appropriate and modest enough for a death row inmate's last meal. Last words, Sacco, viva la ancharia. Vanzetti, I wish to forgive some people for what they are now doing to me. Next up, William Bonin, otherwise known as the Freeway Killer. His crime was murder and sexual assault of at least 21 young men and boys. He was executed on February 23, 1996, at the San Quentin State Prison in California. His execution type was lethal injection. His last meal, pepperoni and sausage pizza, chocolate ice cream, and 3 6-packs of Coke. Last words, I feel the death penalty is not an answer to the problems at hand. Roger Keith Coleman. His crime was a rape and murder of his sister-in-law. He was executed on May 20th, 1992. He was imprisoned at the Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He was executed by the electric chair. His last meal was fried chicken, peas, rolls, apple pie, and coffee. His last words, an innocent man is going to be murdered tonight. I guess he wasn't necessarily talking about himself. Robert Lee Macy. His crime was committing a murder during a robbery. He was executed on March 27, 2001, at the San Quentin State Prison in California. He was executed via lethal injection. His last meal was cheese omelet, white toast, strawberries, oatmeal, and milk. His last words, forgiveness is giving up your right to revenge. Samuel Gonzalez. His crime was committing a double murder. He was executed on December 9, 1999, at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed via the lethal injection. His last meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and peach cobbler. There you go. Once again, that's pretty good. His last words, I just want to tell my family I'm sorry for all the grief. Next up is Walter LeGrand. His crime was a bank robbery and murder. He was executed on March 3, 1999, at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence, Arizona. He was executed via the gas chamber. His last meal was 6 fried eggs, fried potatoes, 6 strips of bacon, 4 slices of toast, and coffee. His last words, I'm not afraid of dying. Garcia Glenn White. His crime was committing a double homicide in which he was convicted of killing Burnett Miller and her daughter Annette during a burglary. Both victims were fatally stabbed. He was executed on April 26, 2000 in Huntsville, Texas via lethal injection. His last meal were fried chicken, a cheeseburger, French fries, salad, vanilla ice cream, and a Coke. His last words, "I apologize for the things I have done. I hope that you will find peace in your heart and strength in your mind." Next up is James French, whose crime was killing a motorist and later killed his cellmate while serving a life sentence. He was executed on August 10th, 1966, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. He was executed by the electric chair. Last meal were fried shrimp, French fries, T-bone steak, and a slice of pie. Last words, "How's this for your headline? French fries." David Edwin Mason. His crime was he was convicted of killing 5 people. He was executed on August 24th, 1993, at the San Quentin State Prison in California. He was executed via the gas chamber. He declined to get a special last meal, and his last words, "I have learned that God forgives everything, and I hope that God forgives everyone." Next up is the infamous Timothy McVeigh. His crime was killing 168 people on April 19th, 1995, in the Oklahoma City bombing. He was executed on June 11th, 2001, at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, via the lethal injection. His last meal was 2 pints of chocolate chip ice cream. His last words was he quoted Invictus poem, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." Williams. As a side note before we get started, he was a co-founder of the Crips, which was a notorious street gang in L.A. In 1979, he was convicted of 4 murders during 2 separate robberies. He was executed by a lethal injection on December 13, 2005, at the San Quentin State Prison in California. He did not request a special last meal. In the hours leading up to his execution, he only drank milk. His last words, even though they weren't necessarily last words, he says, "Are you guys doing that right?" as they were struggling to insert the IV lines. Frank Spisak. He was convicted of murdering 3 individuals in a series of shootings at the Cleveland State University. He was executed on February 17, 2011. He was located at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, Ohio. He was executed by the lethal injection, and his last words was he quoted some Bible verses in German. I don't know German. And his last meal was spaghetti with tomato sauce, salad, chocolate cake, and coffee. Alfred Bourgeoisie. He was convicted of sexually abusing and murdering his 2-year-old daughter. He was executed on December 11th in 2020. He was located at the United States Prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was executed by a lethal injection, and he maintained his innocence, stating that he did not commit the crime. His last meal, seafood stuffed mushrooms, fried shrimp Alfredo pasta, biscuits, and cheesecake from Red Lobster. Stephen Michael Woods, Jr. He was convicted in the capital murders of Ronald Whitehead, 21, and Bethina Brose, 19, on May 2, 2001, in The Colony, Texas. He was executed on September 13, 2011, and he was located at the Huntsville unit of the Texas prison system in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed via lethal injection. His last meal, he requested a substantial meal including 2 pounds of bacon, a large 4-meat pizza, 4 fried chicken breasts, 2 drinks of Mountain Dew, Pepsi, root beer, and sweet tea, 2 pints of ice cream, 5 chicken fried steaks, 2 hamburgers with bacon, fries, and a dozen garlic breadsticks with Mariana sauce on the side. Wow, that guy, he did it. All right, there you go. His last words, "You're not about to witness an execution. You're about to witness a murder. I am strapped down for something Marcus Rhodes did. I never killed anybody ever. I love you, Mom. I love you, Tally. This is wrong. This whole thing is wrong." Lisa Montgomery. She was convicted of strangling a pregnant woman and cutting the baby from that woman's womb. Man, that's bad. She was executed on January 13th, 2021. She was located at the U.S. prison Terre Haute in Terre Haute, Indiana. She was executed by a lethal injection. Her last word, was no. Last meal was fried chicken, fried potatoes, and cola. Earl Forrest. Earl Forrest was convicted of the 2002 murders of Harriet Smith, Michael Wells, and Dent County Sheriff's Deputy Joanne Barnes in Missouri. He was executed on May 11, 2016. He was at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bone Tarrant, Missouri. He was executed by lethal injection. He did not provide any final words or last statement. His last meal was he requested steak, pasta, fruit plate, sliced tomatoes, and cucumbers, chocolate cake, and milk. And I'm telling you, these guys, they're in for it. I mean, they're in for a good meal. Samuel Flippen. Samuel Flippen was convicted of the 1994 murder of his 2-year-old stepdaughter, Brittany Nicole Hutton, in North Carolina. He was executed on August 18, 2006. He was held at the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was executed by lethal injection. He did make no official final statement, and his last meal was popcorn, shrimp, hush puppies, French fries, and a Coke. Stanley Allison Baker, Jr. He was convicted of the 1994 robbery and murder of Wayne John Walters, a clerk at an adult video store in College Station, Texas. Baker shot Walters with a shotgun and stole approximately $40 to $50 from the cash register. Wow, that is tragic. He was executed on May 30th, 2002. He was at the Huntsville unit of the Texas prison system in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by lethal injection. His last meal were 2 16-ounce ribeye steaks. Hello, sign me up for that one. 1 pound of thinly sliced turkey breast, 12 strips of bacon, 2 large hamburgers with mayonnaise. Oh, this is just getting better all the time. 2 large hamburgers with mayonnaise, onion, lettuce, and 2 large baked potatoes with butter, sour cream, cheese, and chives. Whoa. 4 slices of cheese or half a pound of grated cheddar cheese, chef salad with blue cheese dressing. Okay, I'm there. And a dozen scrambled eggs with onions, tomatoes, bell peppers, and cheese. Holy crap. That's amazing. His last words? Well, I don't have anything to say. I'm just sorry about what I did to Mr. Walters. That's all. Next is John Ballantyne. He was convicted of the 1998 murders of 3 teenagers, Edward Kaler, Kai Geyer, and Stephen Watson. He was executed on February 8, 2023. He was at the Huntsville unit of the Texas prison system in Huntsville, Texas. He died of lethal injection and reportedly said for his last words, "Yes, ma'am, I want to thank y'all. I love y'all for supporting me. I want to apologize for the wrong I did to y'all. Forgive me. I'm ready, ma'am." And as we know from previous experience, Texas does not offer any special last meals, and we don't have a record of anything that he ate. Next up, Robert Gleason. He was already serving a life sentence for murder. Gleason was also convicted of killing 2 fellow inmates in Virginia's prison system in 2009 and 2010. He was executed on January 16, 2013. He was located at the Greensville Correctional Center at Jarrett, Virginia. He died by electrocution. Gleason's last words included the Irish phrase, "Pog mo thon," meaning "kiss my arse." His last meal was kept secret at his request, so that's kind of boring. What a loser. Jeffrey Allen Barney. He was convicted of the 1981 rape and murder of Ruby Mae Longsworth, the wife of a minister who had befriended him in Houston, Texas. Barney assaulted her and strangled her with a microphone cord. He was executed on April 16, 1986, and he was located at the Huntsville unit at Huntsville, Texas, Texas prison system. He was also executed by lethal injection. His last meal were Frosted Flakes cereal with milk. His last words, "I'm sorry for what I've done, and I deserve it, and I hope Jesus forgives me." Walter Barton. Walter Barton was convicted of the 1991 murder of an 81-year-old Gladys Kuehler in Missouri. He was executed on May 19, 2020. He was located at the Eastern Reception, Diagnostics, and Correctional Center in Boone Terre, Missouri. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last meal was not publicly documented. His last words, and he did maintain his innocence, stating, "I, Walter Archie Barton, am innocent, and they are executing an innocent man." John Battaglia. John Battaglia was convicted of murdering his two daughters, 9-year-old Mary Faith and 6-year-old Liberty, in a 2001 during a scheduled visit. He was executed on February 1st, 2018. He also was held at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. He died by a lethal injection, and his last words were addressed to his ex-wife Mary Jean Pearl by saying, "Well, hi, Mary Jean. I'll see y'all later. Bye." And as we know, Texas does not offer any special last meals, and we have no other record of it. James Bethard. James Bethard was convicted of the 1984 murders of his ex-girlfriend, her 2 children, and her brother in East Texas. He was executed on December 9, 1999, and he also was located at the Huntsville unit of the Texas prison system in Huntsville, Texas. He died by lethal injection, and he maintained his innocence, stating, "I did not kill them," and there was, of course, no last meal documented. Napoleon Beasley. Napoleon Beasley was convicted of the 1994 murder of a 60-year-old John Ludig during a carjacking in Tyler, Texas. He committed it when Beasley was 17 years old. He was executed on May 28, 2002. He was located at the Huntsville unit of the Huntsville, Texas prison system. He died by a lethal injection. His last words were, "The act I committed to put me here was not just heinous, it was senseless. But the person that committed that act is no longer here. I am." And of course, no public last meal. Next up is the infamous Timothy McVeigh. His crime was killing 168 people on April 19, 1995, in the Oklahoma City bombing. He was executed on June 11, 2001, at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, via the lethal injection. His last meal was 2 pints of chocolate chip ice cream. His last words was he quoted in Victor's poem, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." Gary Heidnik. Gary Heidnik was convicted of kidnapping, torturing, and murdering women in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania between 1986 and 1987. He was executed on July 6, 1999, and he was located at the State Correctional Institution in Rockview, Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. He was executed by a lethal injection. He did not make a final statement, but he had 2 slices of cheese pizza and black coffee for his last meal. Sounds kind of boring. Rodney Burgay. Rodney Burgay pleaded guilty to the 2011 murder of correctional officer Ronald Johnson during a failed prison escape in South Dakota. He was executed on October 29, 2018, and he was located at the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He died via lethal injection. He declined to have a special last meal and so was offered a standard prison meal. His last words were, "Sorry for the delay, I got caught in traffic. I love you and I'll meet you out there." Brandon Bernard. Brandon Bernard was convicted for his involvement in the 1999 kidnapping and murder of Todd and Stacy Bagley in Texas. He was executed on December 10, 2020, and he was located at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was executed by a lethal injection. Last meal was a meat lover's pizza and a brownie. His last words as he apologized to the family, saying, "I'm sorry." And those are the only words that I can say that completely capture how I feel now and how I felt that day. Edward Hartman. Edward Hartman was convicted of the 1993 murder of Herman Smith in North Carolina. He was executed on October 3, 2003, and he was located at the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He died by a lethal injection. His last meal was a cheeseburger, french fries, and a Coke. His last words were, "I am sorry for the pain and grief I have caused. I ask for your forgiveness, and I hope you find peace." James Bigby. James Bigby was convicted of the 1987 murders of Michael Treckle and his 4-month-old son, Jason, in Texas. He was executed on March 14, 2017. He was also located at the Huntsville unit of the Texas prison system in Huntsville, Texas. He died by a lethal injection, and he apologized to the victims, saying, "I'm sorry it went on for a terribly long time. I hope that my death will bring you peace and closure." And of course, as we know, there's no special meal in Texas. Carl Blue. Carl Blue was convicted of murdering his ex-girlfriend, Carmen Richards, by dousing her with gasoline and setting her on fire in 1994. Boy, you talk about cruel. He was executed on February 21st, 2013, and he was located and executed at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last words were, Blue expressed love for his family and victim's family, stating, "I never meant to hurt you all. Tell my kids I love them. I love you all. I'm sorry." He was served a standard prison meal for his last meal. Gary Ray Boyles, a convicted serial killer, and he was convicted of murdering 6 men in 1994, targeting gay men along the I-95 corridor. He was executed on August 22, 2019, at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida. He was executed by a lethal injection, and in a handwritten statement, he apologized for the pain and suffering he caused, stating, "I never wanted this to be my life. You don't wake up one day and decide to become a serial killer." Well, I think maybe you must. Anyway, his last meal were 3 cheeseburgers, French fries, and bacon. Kenneth Boyd. Kenneth Boyd was convicted in the 1988 murders of his estranged wife, Julie Boyd, and her father, Thomas Curry. He was executed on December 2, 2005. He was located at the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, and he was executed by a lethal injection. Boyd's final statement included, "I'm sorry for what I've done. I'm up here for the mistakes I've made." His last meal was a well-done steak, baked potato with sour cream, salad with ranch dressing, a Pepsi, and a slice of pecan pie. Eric Scott Branch. Eric Scott Branch was convicted of the 1993 rape and murder of Susan Morris, a University of West Florida student. He was executed on February 22, 2018, and he was executed at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last words, he screamed, "Murderers, murderers, murderers," just before his execution. He declined a special last meal and was served a standard prison meal. Alvin Brazil. Alvin Brazil was convicted of the 1993 murder of Douglas White during a robbery, also sexually assaulting White's wife. He was executed on December 11, 2018, and was executed at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by a lethal injection. He apologized to his victim's family, saying, "I would like to apologize for the grief and pain that I've caused you all. I pray that you will forgive me." And as we know, Texas offers no special prison meal, but receive the standard prison fare. Next up is Jeffrey Dahmer. He murdered 17 young men and boys involving necrophilia and cannibalism. He died on November 28, 1994. And he was actually not executed, but he was killed by an inmate. He was located at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. His last words, "I don't care if I live or die. Go ahead and kill me." And we don't have a record of his last meal either, as far as that goes. Christopher Emmett. Christopher Emmett was convicted of the 2001 murder of his co-worker, John Langley, whom he fatally beat with a brass lamp in Danville, Virginia motel room to rob him and purchase crack cocaine. He was executed on July 24, 2008, and he was located at the Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last words were, "Tell the governor he just lost my vote. Y'all hurry this thing along. I'm dying to get out of here." His last meal was not publicly documented. Charles Brooks, Jr. Charles Brooks, Jr. was convicted of the 1976 murder of David Gregory, a mechanic whom he and an accomplice abducted and killed during a car test drive. He was executed on December 7, 1982, at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He died by a lethal injection, and he was the first person in the United States to be executed using lethal injection. His last words, he recited a prayer in Arabic. His last meal was a T-bone steak, French fries with ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, biscuits, peach cobbler, and iced tea. Arthur Brown Jr. Arthur Brown Jr. was convicted of the 1992 drug-related murders of 4 people, including a pregnant woman in Houston, Texas. He was executed on March 9, 2023, at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by a lethal injection. He maintained his innocence, saying, "What is occurring here tonight is not justice. It's murder of an innocent man for a murder that occurred in 1992. As we know, there's no special meals in Texas. He was just served the standard prison meal. Gary Burris. Gary Burris was convicted of a 1980 murder of a cab driver, Kenneth Chambers, in Indianapolis, Indiana. He was executed on November 20th, 1997. He was executed at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City, Indiana. He was executed by a lethal injection, and his final statement was, "Let's rock and roll, let's get this show on the road." His last meal, a cheeseburger, French fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Alva Campbell. Alva Campbell was convicted of the 1997 murder of an 18-year-old Charles Dials during a carjacking in Columbus, Ohio. His execution was originally scheduled for November 15th of 2017. However, the execution was called off later after officials failed to find a suitable vein for the lethal injection. So that's kind of weird. I guess he's currently incarcerated at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ohio, even though his execution was attempted by lethal injection but unsuccessful. On March 3, 2018, Franklin County Prosecutor Ron O'Brien announced that Campbell had died of natural causes. He was 69 years old, had cancer, lung disease, asthma, and heart problems. Last words, he did not really have an opportunity to make a final statement during the attempted execution. His last meal was, he did request pork chops, greens, sweet potato pie, mashed potatoes, and gravy. That's kind of strange. Ruben Montoya Cantu. Ruben Montoya Cantu was convicted of a 1984 murder of Pedro Gomez during an attempted robbery in San Antonio, Texas, at the age of 17. He was executed on August 24th in 1993 at the Huntsville unit of the Texas prison system in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by a lethal injection. When asked if he had a final statement, he said, "No, sir." His last meal, he requested a bubblegum, which was denied. Next up is Juan Castillo. Juan Edward Castillo, also known as the San Antonio Lovers Lane Killer. His crime was in December of 2003. Castillo and accomplices, including his girlfriend Deborah Espinosa, orchestrated a plan to rob 19-year-old Tommy Garcia. Espinosa lured Garcia to a secluded area with the promise of drugs and sex. Once there, Castillo attempted to rob Garcia. When Garcia resisted, Castillo fatally shot him. He was executed on May 16, 2018. He was held and executed at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. His execution style was lethal injection. His last words were, "To everyone that has been there for me, you know you are. I love y'all. See you on the other side." That's it. His last meal? As we know, Texas doesn't offer a special last meal, so he just received the standard prison fare. James Lee Clark. James Lee Clark was convicted of the 1993 rape and murder of a 17-year-old Shari Catherine Cruz in Denton County, Texas. He was executed on April 11, 2007, at the Huntsville unit of the Texas prison system in Huntsville, Texas. He died by a lethal injection, and when asked if he had a final statement, he chuckled nervously and said, I don't know. He did not request a special meal. James Colburn. James Colburn was convicted of the 1994 murder of a 55-year-old Peggy Murphy, whom he attempted to rape and then strangled in his apartment in Conroe, Texas. He was executed on March 26, 2003. He was executed at the Huntsville unit in Texas, and he died by a lethal injection. His last words, "The statement that I would like to make is none of this should have happened, and now I'm dying, there's nothing left to worry about. I know it was a mistake. I have no one to blame but myself. It's no big deal about choosing right from wrong." Of course, there were no special meals that he had because he was in Texas. Richard Cooey. Richard Cooey was convicted for the 1986 rape and murder of two University of Akron students, Don McCreary and Wendy Alfredo, in Ohio. He was executed on October 14, 2008, at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, Ohio. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last words, "For what? You haven't paid any attention to anything I've said in the last 22 and a half years. Why would anybody pay attention to anything I've got to say now?" Well, that's probably a reasonable comment. Fair observation. His last meal was a T-bone steak with A1 sauce. All right, he's getting back at him a little bit. Onion rings, French fries, 4 eggs over easy, hash browns, buttered toast, bear claw pastries, a pint of Rocky Mountain ice cream, and a Diet Coke. There you go. William Jasper Darden. William Jasper Darden was convicted of the 1973 murder of James Carl Turman during a robbery at a furniture store in Lakeland, Florida. He was executed on March 15, 1988, at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida. He was executed by electrocution. He did not make a final statement, and he declined a special meal and was served the regular prison meal, but he did not eat it. James Hubbard. James Hubbard was convicted of the 1977 murder of a 62-year-old Lillian Montgomery in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He was executed on August 5, 2004, at the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. He was executed by a lethal injection, and his last words, "I want to thank my family for standing by me through all this. I appreciate their love." His last meal was a breakfast consisting of eggs, grits, toast, and coffee. John Hummel. John Hummel was convicted of the 2009 murders of his pregnant wife, Joy Hummel, and his 5-year-old daughter, Jody, and his father-in-law, Clyde Bedford, in Fort Worth, Texas. He was executed on June 30th of 2021 at the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last words, "Yes, sir, I want to thank all of you. I love you all. I want to thank all of you for supporting me. I want to thank the Lord Jesus Christ for giving me strength. I want to ask for forgiveness. I'm ready to go home." His last meal was the regular prison meal of chicken patties, mashed potatoes, country gravy, green beans, and sliced bread. Corey Johnson. Corey Johnson was convicted of 7 murders in 1992 in Richmond, Virginia, as a member of the Newton Gang, a drug trafficking organization. He was executed on January 14, 2021, at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was executed by lethal injection. His last words, in his final statement, he apologized for his crimes, expressing remorse to the families of the victims and thanking his family for their help. His last meal included pizza and a strawberry shake. Gregory Scott Johnson. Gregory Scott Johnson was convicted of the 1985 murder of 82-year-old Ruby Hulslar in Anderson, Indiana. He was executed on May 25, 2005, at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City, Indiana. He was executed by a lethal injection. His last words included an apology to the victim's family and expressions of remorse for his actions. His last meal, he requested a pizza and a birthday cake, which he shared with his family. Robert Comer. Robert Comer committed a crime as convicted of murdering Larry Pritchard at an Apache Lake campsite in Arizona. He also kidnapped and sexually assaulted a 19-year-old woman. He was executed on May 22, 2007, and was held at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence, Arizona. His execution type was lethal injection. Last words, "Go Raiders," referencing his support for the Oakland Raiders. His last meal was fried okra, 4 buns with butter and salt, and 2 slices of banana bread. Claude Jones. Claude Jones was convicted in the 1989 murder of a liquor store owner, Alan Heisendager, in Point Blank, Texas. He was executed on December 7th in 2000. He was held at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by a lethal injection. He did decline a final statement, but his last meal he requested a large meat pizza. Troy Davis. Troy Davis was convicted in 1991 for the 1989 murder of police officer Mark McPhail in Savannah, Georgia. Davis maintained his innocence throughout the trial and appeals. He was executed on September 21, 2011, and was held at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison in Jackson, Georgia. He was executed by a lethal injection, and his last words, he maintained his innocence, saying, "I did not have a gun that night. I did not shoot your family member." Well, sounds pretty definitive. He declined to have a special last meal and was offered the standard prison meal tray. John Wayne Gacy. His crime was murdering 33 young men and boys. He was executed on May 10, 1994 at the Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. He was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was fried shrimp, a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, French fries, and strawberries. That sounds pretty good to me. His last words were, "Kiss my ass." Angel Nieves Diaz. Angel Nieves Diaz was convicted for the 1979 murder of Joseph Nagy, the manager of a Miami strip club, during a robbery. He was executed on December 13, 2006, at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida. He was executed by a lethal injection, and during his last words, he stated he maintained his innocence, stating in Spanish, "The state of Florida is killing an innocent person." His last meal, he declined a special last meal and was offered the standard prison meal tray. Jack Harold Jones Jr. Jack Harold Jones Jr. was convicted of multiple murders, including a 1995 rape and murder of Mary Phillips in Arkansas. He was executed on April 24, 2017, and was located at the Cummins Unit in Lincoln County, Arkansas. He was executed by a lethal injection. In his last words, he expressed remorse for his crimes and apologized to the victim's family, stating, "I hope over time you can learn who I really am. I am not a monster." His last meal was fried chicken, potato logs with tartar sauce, beef jerky bites, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and fruit punch. James Allen Red Dog. James Allen Red Dog pled no contest to the 1991 murder of Hugh Pennington in Wilmington, Delaware. Red Dog had a history of violent crimes, including previous convictions for armed robbery and involvement in multiple killings. He was executed on March 3, 1993. He was held at the Delaware Correctional Center in Smyrna, Delaware. He was executed by a lethal injection. Red Dog thanked his family and friends for their support and then said to the remaining witnesses, "As for the rest of you, you can all kiss my ass." His last meal, there are no specific details about his last meal. Robert Drew. Robert Drew was convicted of the 1983 stabbing death of a 17-year-old Jeffrey Mays in Texas. Drew and an accomplice, Ernest Pluralowski, killed Mays after he gave them a ride in exchange for gas money. He was executed on August 2, 1994, at the Huntsville Unit in Huntsville, Texas. He was executed by a lethal injection. He denounced the death penalty, stating, "Keep up the fight. The death penalty is legal murder. They've taken the life of an innocent man." For a last meal, he requested a last meal of fried chicken, French fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Not bad fare. John David Duty. John David Duty, while serving a life sentence for a 1978 conviction of rape, robbery, and shooting with intent to kill, Duty was convicted of the first-degree murder for strangling his cellmate, Curtis J. Wise Jr., on December 2001 at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He was executed on December 16, 2010. He was held at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. He was executed by lethal injection, marking the first use of phenobarbital in United States executions due to the shortage of sodium pentoenethol. His last words, "I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me, not for my sake, but for your own. Thank you, Lord Jesus, I'm going home." For his last meal, he had a double cheeseburger with mayonnaise, a foot-long hot dog with cheese, mustard, and onions, a cherry limeade, and a banana shake.